And we're live, we're good.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, June the 13th. As we always do, we will start with the playing of our national anthem. Thank you. We'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the town of Shelburne resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. These traditional territories upon which we live, work, and play or learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions. It is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. We encourage residents to review the call to action information by visiting the website, which is posted on the screen, to further research and educate oneself. Just a reminder that members have an obligation to disclose any pecuniary interest that they may have in relation to any item on this evening's agenda, and those declarations must be made verbally and in writing. Can I have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes of the May 30th council meeting, as well as the May 30th Committee of Adjustment meeting? Moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Buffett. Any discussion on those minutes? All in favor? That's carried. All right. Were there any questions submitted, Jennifer?
No, sir, no questions this evening.
All right, so first up then is a presentation. We are joined this evening by Inspector Terry Ward, who is the Detachment Commander of Dufferin OPP. So Inspector Ward is going to do a brief presentation, and then I think he's willing to stick around for a little while afterwards to answer any questions that council members may have. So with that, Inspector Ward, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to really get into this too heavy. Everyone should have this goals and objectives document that was presented. And I mean, I can burn up my time really quick just going through each point. So maybe, I mean, there's a few highlights we can touch on, but at the end of the day, it's probably more, it's easier if anybody has any questions on the document, we can touch on that. I know people are wondering and maybe not, but I mean, all the officers that came over from Shelburne were successful in their probation periods. So they're all full-time employees now with the OPP. Lots of opportunities for them should they decide to stay in the community and or leave the community. So it's nice to see that. Like I said, every one of them has been successful and become a great part of this Dufferin team we're building. One of the highlights, I mean, we'll take a look at really quick is the average calls. And since we took over, we're averaging about 330 calls per month, which is still a significant number of calls. And those vary from the minor calls right up into, as you know, we had a homicide last year and we had a serious mental health with a weapon call. So there's quite a range We take the good and the bad. The visibility piece is what I'm huge on, community involvement. And that's what we've got. And again, a success story is just what's happened right now is with all the car entries going on, and we were able to engage our community street crimes unit, and some video came to light, and within a day they had a suspect under arrest. So, I mean, that's the positive of being able to do that. And I know, Mr. Mayor, there was a question came out today in regards to why that party wasn't named in our press release. And the simple answer to that is that investigation is still ongoing. So we don't want to burn that person right now. Obviously, our community street crimes unit are engaged in the property and drugs. And I can't speak to what information may be coming forward from that investigation that he was involved in, but needless to say, we're not going to put his name out there right yet. So from what I'm hearing is his name's pretty much out there on social media anyway, but from our standpoint, we're not gonna put it out there right now. I think it's kind of just, if everyone's had a chance to kind of look through this document, maybe it's just as easy to kind of go, if anybody has any questions related to this document and or any specific questions related to Shelburne or the Dufferin OPP, I'm more than willing to take a look at it and answer it as best I can. And if I don't have an answer for it, I'll definitely get you something and bring it back. It's been a good working relationship with the Police Services Board. I can honestly say they're engaged. COVID has kind of trumped us a little bit in doing some of the community stuff, but I'm sure we'll start to move forward as some of the events start to unfold and we get our auxiliary unit back up and running. I know they were busy this past weekend going to some of the events that are out there. And yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, it's probably just best if anybody has any questions and we'll see what we can answer.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Mills. And thank you, Inspector Ward, for coming by. This was not part of the report, at least I don't recall seeing it, but it may have been. But in any event, this is regarding incidents at the high school. There have been at least a few where certainly the police have been involved. And I guess my question is there some sort of trend that you're seeing, concerns that you have? And if so, if the answer is yes, is there anything that you would suggest that either we could do as a collectively, a town working with the policing staff to maybe try to combat maybe some of the issues that may exist at the school? Obviously, without getting into specifics in individual cases, but just generally.
Yeah, it's a good question, Deputy Mayor. As we know, there was actually 2 occurrences today. And I hate to say it, both appear to be racially motivated. And I wish I had the answer for you on what the fix is to that. I don't. Our hands as police are kind of tied. As you know, the police board and the elected trustees voted not to have us in the schools or on the property unless it's a call for service.
The school board.
Sorry?
The school board. I think you mentioned police board.
Oh, sorry. No, the school board. Sorry. And the elected trustees for the school board are the ones that made that decision. And so it kind of ties our hands as far as being proactive, and it makes us reactive. So, I mean, again, it's something that the police and the partners within the community need to work together to build that trust. And I really, other than us being reactive right now, we have to find ways to be proactive. And that involves everybody, right? The police services boards, all the partners, to bring that everyone more together. And it's the youth, right? And as we all know, kids can be mean. And it's appearing to be happening, especially at the high school, where it's dividing into different groups and they're getting into scraps amongst themselves. So somehow we have to be able, and not just the police, I mean, we seem to be looked at as the bad guys sometimes. And so it becomes a community problem that we got to be able to unite everybody. And it's an uphill swing for sure, especially with the diversity and all the movement coming into town and everything that's going on. So I wish I could give you a better answer, Deputy Mayor, but I mean, we're here, we're willing to get engaged. It's just there's kind of a few roadblocks up right now that kind of hinder us from doing anything.
Yeah, no, I thank you, and I appreciate the honesty there. I mean, you're right. It doesn't stop us as elected officials to reach out to the school and see how we could work together, combined with other community partners to try to bring some resolution. I know at the Police Services Board, as you know, and certainly our mayor knows that, the intent is to maybe hand out some awards to incentivize some of the students there and to get them out of trouble and down the right path. And so I know that work is being done, but certainly it seems like more needs to be done clearly. So anyways, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question though.
Okay. Councillor Bernardo and then Councillor Wagner.
The question I have is in regards to speeding, of course, in the town and the bypasses that are being used by residents other than those that live within the community. We have those speed signs put up, and we're wondering, with the data, I'm hoping that the data is helping you out, but with the data you're collecting and knowing the streets that are being used and the speeds that are being posted on those streets, is there any way we can better stop what's happening? Because that's the biggest complaint I'm getting from residents is the speeding that's going down. And I'll say it, Greenwood, Fiddle Park, William Street, by people trying to get through the town as quickly as possible and not go through the lights.
Yeah, that's a Dufferin County issue. I hear that at every council and every police service board I go to. It's the traffic because we're a throughway, right? Some of the things we're finding with the data is a lot of the complaints, and I'm not saying all of them, but some of them are perceived problems. The speed limit, say 40, 50 kilometers an hour, as a citizen standing on the sidewalk, that seems like an excessive speed. The problem is it isn't. So we collect the data and we think, the community says they have a speeding problem, and we analyze the data and we see that there's not a speeding problem. That aside, we're trying to continue to do the engagement piece, the enforcement piece, and the education piece. And that's, again, our members going in and, sidetrack from the speeding. One of the big things we've been laying a lot of charges on lately is the cell phones. I believe we're already this year over 100 and some charges in Shelburne alone with the cell phones. So again, right, that's something that we've identified as definitely as a problem. The speeding, yes, it's there. And again, we'll continue to try to make sure that our traffic management unit and our officers that are working in the town are engaged in that. There's only so many officers to go around, and that sounds like a cop-out, but sometimes, Dufferin County is a big county, and we're here, there, and everywhere. But as far as the speeding goes, we're definitely aware of it. We're definitely aware of certain areas that it's not perceived, that it's real. But we have to decipher between those two things, is whether if it's perceived and we throw resources at it, we're wasting our time. If it's real, then yes, we definitely want to put the resources on there.
And as a follow-up, the other complaint I'm getting is the stop signs, people not stopping at them. They're just rolling right through them or just going right through them. And I've stood on some corners as I'm walking around the town and just seen that happening. Is there any other method than having an officer in a car sitting at that stop sign of, in your mind, of possibly somehow stopping people from doing that?
Again, it's a good question, and we know it's a problem. The issues we have is exactly like you said, Councillor. You put an officer out there, and all of a sudden people see him, and now they don't commit the offense, right? It's one of those things where we have to try and be surreptitious a bit, to kind of be a bit sneaky to get those people, and we are. But to say what else can you be done, I don't have an answer for that. I mean, again, it's that whole piece of we have to try and continue to educate and then enforce, right? And that's and again, if there's hot spots that we're not picking up on, by all means, get it through to the Police Services Board. That'll get it to me, and then we can dial in on those areas, because again, we can't be on every street all the time. So we may be missing out on a few spots that we should be sitting on. So by all means, let us know where they are.
Can I make a recommendation then? Park and Fiddle Park.
And is there a specific time or all the time?
Weekends is really bad.
Okay. We'll definitely try to, yeah, again, right? We go out there, we sit there for 5 minutes. They know we're there. Everybody's flashing their headlights and that kind of,
Yeah.
you know, then we drive away and then it starts up again. So, but again, it's better than not, right? So it's, again, it's to have that visibility and get the people out there that if they see us, then hopefully they're not committing the offense.
Yeah, unfortunately, that spot's not a very easy spot to hide a police car that, you know.
Yeah, one of the other things we can look at doing, we've tried to, with the contracts with Orangeville and with Shelburne, we've tried to keep marked cruisers in town just so people have that visibility. But we do have ghost cars, so we can definitely start putting those in there. And if there's places to park that can kind of sit back from the intersections, then maybe we can, you know, do a bit of enforcement that way as well.
Thank you very much.
And just before we move on to Councillor Wagner, when it comes to you know, data collection, you know, Inspector Ward, you and I have talked about this before, and PC Roach and I have talked about this. I mean, it's helpful for you folks if people call the non-emergency number, if they see that sort of stuff, because that helps you guys build data and know where to deploy resources, right? So that's probably more helpful than just passing on anecdotal suggestions that, you know, this street's a bad street for speeding. If somebody sees it, call it in. Is that sage advice?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's good, because again, what I see is a lot of people think we police off social media.
Yeah.
We don't monitor social media. So the best way to, if you see an offense, is to call the 1-888 number and report it. And that way we can track it, respond to it. Because if you're just putting it on social media and Facebooks and everybody's complaining and they don't see the police respond, then it just escalates from there. And all that does is be a negative, right? And we're trying to build a positive, not a negative. And we're not going to respond if someone's complaining on Facebook, because that's not how our system works.
Yeah. And that number, it's 1-888-310-1122.
1122.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Wagner.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Mills. Thank you, Inspector Ward, for your report. It was very well put together, so I appreciate that. So I'm just going to piggyback a little bit off of Deputy Mayor Anderson with regards to issues that we're seeing, not necessarily at the school, but I'm just wondering, as I read through the report, I wasn't quite sure if you guys, and as of course by you guys, I mean the OPP, if you sort of take an ongoing recording of calls with regards to bullying. You know, we understand that certain aspects of the education will address it, but if it's not happening within the, you know, the school grounds, then they kind of, their hands are tied, right? So I didn't kind of notice anywhere on there if there was, you know, sort of that level of recording to see about bullying, you know, calls for service regarding that when it doesn't pertain to a school situation. You know, if not, if maybe there are plans to do that so that we can monitor that trend. And obviously, if it tends to go in an upward motion, we can better address it and, you know, thoroughly address it at that point.
So basically under our system, there's no such classification as bullying. It's basically considered trouble with youth. So that if we do receive any of those calls, it would be scored under a trouble with youth call. And that's what would be classified as. And I know Deputy Mayor Anderson, he asked about that at the Police Services Board a couple times. So we've kind of tracked that a bit. And that's one of the things that we do report on to the Police Services Board, is those trouble with youth calls.
Okay, that's wonderful. I just wanted to kind of make sure that, you know, we were taking an active role to sort of document those, so that if we are seeing, you know, a trend in an increase in trend, I guess you could say, that we could take a more active role to address them. And, you know, I don't know what that would mean, but at that point, obviously we could.
No, and that's a good point. Like, I mean, it's we're in it as a police, we're kind of in a catch-22, right? Like, we want to engage and we want to work with the kids and the parents. And the school boards have kind of stopped us from being engaged at the school. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine, but we have to look at other entities to be able to do that. And it's kind of tough because what we're finding in certain circumstances is we're not getting the support of the parents. So if we don't get the support of the parents and they're alienating the police from their kids, we're having a hard time. And it becomes, again, we're just reactive, right? It's hard to be proactive if no one's willing to work with you.
Very true. Very true. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's maybe something that, we can really start to roll our sleeves up with at the police service board, and, try to get some connections made with, sports organizations and stuff like that. And, find other ways to do that outreach and that relationship building with the youth. But I know we've talked about it sort of generally, but, I'm sure there are some practical things that we can do to try to bridge that.
I think, Mr. Mayor, we need to engage the youth, but we also need to engage the parents.
Yeah.
And we've got to get those lines of communication going both ways, right? That we are there to help. We're not there to pick on your kid or, anything like that. If we're engaged, it's because we've been called to be engaged.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Inspector Ward while we have him? No? Okay. Well, let me just say, from my perspective, I think the experience thus far, it's been a year and 3 months, has been really positive. One of the things that sort of kept coming to the surface through the whole costing process and transition process was, when you switch over to OPP, you'll lose that personal touch. You won't have that kind of accessibility that you do with the municipal force. And I can say without reservation that my experience has been anything but that. Dealing with Inspector Ward has been a pleasure. I mean, you're extremely accessible. We talk, multiple times a week. Not just formally through police service board meetings, but we're always sort of in touch with each other. I've seen great exposure in the community. The auxiliary unit, being out to several events has been encouraging. The videos that we've done to try to get some messaging out, I think has been worthwhile. And, that just wasn't something that we had the capacity to do with the municipal force. And I have to give a shout out to one of our former Shelburne officers, PC Roach, who's, in the community liaison role. She's been fantastic to work with. And I know we've engaged with her on a number of very specific issues. And she's always been accommodating, and with anybody involved in Dufferin OPP, I have to say, any concerns that I've had to forward along have been dealt with immediately, without any hesitation at all. So for my part, I'm extremely pleased with the service we're receiving, and
I thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and I'll just echo what you're saying. Like, we have a good group of officers here that are dedicated to the community, and it makes it so much easier when I deal with, with Shelburne, the council, and the police services board have been fantastic, and it's enjoyable to work with each of you. And like I said, that should never be that standoff that you don't have my line or the open communications. I'm here and I'm willing to listen. And if we can work together, then let's figure it out. If the police can play a role in it, and a valuable role, not a negative role, it has to be a positive role. And then that's what we want to do. Shelburne's a great community, great bunch of people. And it's been a pleasure to be here tonight.
Well, I mean, even your presence here tonight and, willing to engage in this sort of back and forth discussion in a, frank way, I think is indicative of the relationship we have. So I certainly appreciate that. And if there are no further questions, we'll let Inspector Ward carry on with the rest of his evening. And for posterity, why don't we just have a motion to receive that report? Moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? That's carried. All right, sir. I guess we'll see you next Tuesday at Police Service Board.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Thanks. Yeah, take care.
Okay.
Okay, so we have two proclamations this evening. The first is for National Indigenous Day, which is on June 21st. Whereas on June 21st, Canada will celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day. This is a day for all Canadians to acknowledge the unique heritage, diverse cultures, and outstanding contributions of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And whereas in cooperation with Indigenous organizations, the Government of Canada chose June 21st, the summer solstice, for National Aboriginal Day, known as National Indigenous Peoples Day. And whereas for generations, many Indigenous peoples and communities have celebrated their culture and heritage on or near this day due to the significance of the summer solstice as the longest day of the year. And whereas Shelburne is home to a strong Indigenous community and would like to acknowledge their continued contributions, now therefore I, Mayor Wade Mills, on behalf of the Council of the Town of Shelburne, do hereby proclaim June 21st, 2022 as National Indigenous Peoples Day in the Town of Shelburne. And the second proclamation is for brain injuries. Whereas brain injury happens in an instant, it does not discriminate, nor does it only impact one person. Brain injury changes lives of people of all ages, genders, and ethnicities, leaving little time to adapt. This disability rather lasts a lifetime and often leaves many with feelings of grief, loneliness, anxiety, depression, and an inability to cope. And whereas acquired brain injury is the leading cause of death and disability for those under the age of 45, and acquired brain injury is 15 times more common than spinal cord injury, 30 times more common than breast cancer, and 400 times more common than HIV/AIDS. And whereas as we begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic, we are hopeful that many people will, in time, be able to once again venture out and regain their social networks and supports. We are reminded of the many people with brain injuries who will remain isolated and afraid. The understanding we have gained from our own experiences with isolation this past year or two reminds us to shine a light on brain injury and support those impacted by brain injury in Ontario. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Wade Mills, on behalf of the Council, Town of Shelburne, do hereby proclaim June 2022 as Brain Injury Awareness Month in the Town of Shelburne and encourage citizens to join the Ontario Brain Injury Association's campaign to shine a light on brain injury. Okay, so before we jump into the rest of the agenda, are there any council inquiries for this evening? Councillor Bernardo.
Just wondering, have we acquired the Indigenous, the flag that we were going to acquire, and is it going to be flown from one of our flag masts on June 21st or before June 21st?
And somebody from the DEI committee comment on that? I think that was how it was left. Denise?
So the request has been placed on the DEI agenda for this Thursday.
The request, sorry, for the flag to fly?
No, for the purchase of the flag, and staff confirmed it's about $350. And it's purchased from the organization from Debbie's organization. So you had asked us to direct that to to the DEI committee. So we're assuming that they will approve that, but it also doesn't need to be out of their budget necessarily. It could be a town budget. So, but again, it's on the agenda for Thursday night, following up with the deputy mayor's notice of motion.
Okay, so if the DEI committee approves it, and if we do have it, will we be flying it on June 21st in or before that time frame on one of our flagpoles?
And certainly, if we can get the flag in time, we understand it's a custom flag, and we just have to check how long it would take for them to provide it to us.
Okay.
And if we don't have that flag, then we certainly will just fly another flag that's appropriate in the interim.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Well, this is not a council inquiry, but I figured I'd use the time anyways. I'm
not sure where that's headed, but
no, it's all good. Believe me, it's all good. And you'll know when I say this because you were involved in many of these activities. I just wanted to say it was a great weekend in the town of Shelburne. A number of fantastic things happened, Shelburne and beyond. I'll start off with the multicultural celebration put on by the Dufferin County Multicultural Foundation. There was the event put on by Sanjay, raising money for sick kids. Councillor Wegner, I think Councillor Buffett, myself, and the mayor was there as well. That was a fantastic event, huge turnout. There was the golf event that maybe the mayor could speak to, that was raising money for a good cause as well. And there was also an opening of a few businesses, Wade, in town that we did some ribbon cutting for as well. And lastly, I'll say the dog park. It made a believer out of me too. I'm thinking about getting a dog thanks to Councillor Wegner. And I just wanted to thank her for her leadership on this portfolio. And it was really nice to see it come to fruition and have her there, obviously to see it in fruition, and staff, of course, staff's participation and assistance in making many of these things happen as well. So just a big thank you to all involved, and a big thank you to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I attended the first annual Firefighters Association golf tournament on Saturday afternoon. And other than a brief 5-minute downpour when we were kind of stuck out in the middle of the back of the golf course, it was a wonderful day. I've talked with a couple of the firefighters since then, and it sounds as though it was a successful event, and I think likely something that they'll continue to do going forward. Lots of support from the community in terms of sponsorship and donations for the silent auction table and whatnot. So that was a great event. And to your point, Deputy Mayor, as I mentioned at the ribbon cutting for the dog park, that was just the beginning of what's going to be a busy summer, all the way around. Thanks to the work that staff's doing. Tennis, pickleball courts coming up, Jack Downing Park redevelopment, splash pad later on in the season. So that there's lots going on in the town of Shelburne this summer, and Saturday was certainly a good way to kick it off at the dog park. And I think it's been used lots since Saturday from what I hear. So hopefully everybody's cleaning up after themselves, and that doesn't become an issue, but we'll see how that goes. So no, absolutely. Any other inquiries? No. Okay. I did forget to mention at the outset, Councillor Hull sent me a quick text late this afternoon. He's traveling for work today, and he wasn't going to be settled where he's headed in time to log in for tonight. So he sends his regrets. Okay, so the first item on the regular agenda is the report from our town planner regarding the delegation of authority with respect to site plan controls. So Steve, I will let you kind of explain what it is we're doing and why we're doing it.
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Mills, and good evening, members of council. So I think my report is fairly self-explanatory, but I'll just quickly walk you through it. So back in March, the province introduced Bill 109, which is the More Homes for Everyone Act. And it was subsequently given royal assent on April 14th. So there are some provisions of that act that come into effect on July 1st. In particular, this report is in relation to one of the changes to the Planning Act that the amending act has introduced. So as of July 1st, councils of municipalities in Ontario will no longer have the ability to approve site plans. If you want to continue to have the ability as a municipality to approve site plans, you have to appoint staff to undertake that. This is a fairly common thing, certainly in larger municipalities. I think in Dufferin County, it may only be Orangeville prior to this new legislation that had that delegated authority to staff. The basis for it is the province views that as one way they may be able to shorten timelines and streamline certain types of development applications, specifically site plans. Site plans are not subject to any Planning Act public consultation requirements or public notice requirements. It really is a process between the owner of the property and the municipality. And the key requirement for a site plan is just to make sure that the site will be developed in accordance with the municipality's standards, in accordance with its zoning bylaw, and in accordance with any provincial or upper tier standards that apply. Only certain types of development are subject to site plan approval, and that's under both the town's official plan as well as your current site plan control bylaw, which is a fairly dated bylaw, but has served well in terms of laying out the Planning Act requirements for site plan approval. That's bylaw 8-1986. It deals with things such as, parking, how it's laid out, where, for example, accessible parking spaces are positioned relative to main entrances, ensuring adequate fire routes are provided. There's a host of agencies and departments that review those plans and make sure that all the requirements of the municipality and other agencies are addressed. In conjunction with this change to the Planning Act, the province is also extending the timeline for site plans approvals from 30 days to 60 days. Realistically, no municipality was achieving an approval for site plans in 30 days. So the 60 days is more representative of the process. And I think that change makes sense. What it will mean for council is that rather than me coming to you with a report and kind of the overall site plan and a summary of what the site plan involves and a draft agreement, all of the approval of the drawings, all of the execution of the agreement and review of the agreement terms would occur through staff. The mayor would still need to be called in to sign the final site plan agreement when it's ready. But the agreements in general will be standard. Obviously, some of them have unique requirements that will need to be addressed specific to the development. But there won't be that step in between of going to a report to council to seek authority to have that agreement on a case-by-case basis. What you'll still be provided with, though, is a circulation of the site plan. And like any other arm of the town, you'll have the ability to certainly contact me or other members of your staff if you have any questions about what you're seeing or the nature of the development or any details of it. And similarly to send us an email or provide any comments should you have any. And then certainly once the development is approved and underway, if there are comments about that, those can also be directed to ourselves and staff. We'll also endeavor to provide updates to council from time to time on things that are happening, so you're well aware of what's coming. I think that's a key point as part of these developments, because there can be quite a number of them at any given time that you're aware of what's happening in case you get questions from residents, for example. So the bylaw that's recommended for council consideration tonight is number 30-2022. And it has been revised slightly from the version that was appended to my report. And that was just through some further review with legal counsel, just to make sure we're properly incorporating the whereas preamble statements, and that the delegated authorities in the numbered clauses in the bylaw are very clear. So just to walk you through that, the first authority that council would delegate would be the authority to approve the plans and drawings themselves, which is really kind of the way it's being done already. It's formally council that has been approving those, but it's really on the basis of staff review of those plans. So that would be delegated to the Director of Development and Operations. So we will work with Jim as well as SBA Engineering to make sure that he's comfortable with any drawings that would be signed as the final approved site plans. And then the next authority is the ability to impose conditions. So typically there's conditions such as the requirement to enter an agreement with the town. There could be other conditions imposed, such as a road widening, and those will be ultimately determined by the Director of Development and Operations. And then the rest of the bylaw really deals with the agreement side of things. So the terms of a specific site plan agreement would ultimately be determined by myself with engineering and legal counsel, but it would be the authority of the Director of Legislative Services / clerk. So Jennifer, who would have that authority to make sure the agreement is acceptable to the town. And then once the agreement is finalized and ready for execution, this bylaw would authorize the Director of Legislative Services / clerk and the mayor to sign the agreement. And that agreement will simply implement in words what the drawings show and what the standards of the town are in terms of actual execution of the development. So this bylaw is also required to be read in conjunction with the site plan control bylaw that I just mentioned. And then, of course, it would come into effect not until July 1st. So there are some further site plan applications currently in process that I still aim to have in front of you for your next meeting on June 27th as kind of the last round of site plans that council would approve or deal with. And then beyond that point, any new applications would go through a staff approval process. So that's a summary of my report and the corresponding bylaw, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you. All right. Councillor Buffett and then Councillor Fegan.
Yeah, I guess, so just so that I'm clear, and maybe everybody else is clear. So are you saying in so many words that the process of having public meetings and having council listen to anybody's objections or comments about subdivisions or small applications are basically off the table now, and then it's just handled administratively and that's it?
No, this is only specifically for site plans. So site plans did not already have any kind of public consultation process to them. They're strictly between the property owner and the town. Subdivisions will still go through the same normal process. There'll be public meetings. There's no changes to that. Same with rezonings, consent applications, minor variances. All the other types of planning applications will carry on in their normal course and will come to you first. And through a public meeting. It's really just site plans which don't have any public notice or consultation requirements associated to them.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is because not everybody's well versed in the planning process and what the terminology means. So I just wanted to throw that question out just to clarify it for everybody.
It's an important point. Yeah, thank you for that.
Councillor Fegan.
Actually, Councillor Buffett pretty much eloquently asked the same question that I was getting at. It was a little bit concerned if it was going to be where it was taken out of our hands to be able to discuss and make sure that possible situations that our constituents may have already talked to us about, we're concerned about. But if it's typical smaller situations where public consultation isn't really involved, then I'm okay with that.
And Steve, just to that point, you sort of mentioned at the front end of your presentation that, if concerns are expressed to us or we have concerns of our own, we can still communicate those, to you or to staff, to be addressed kind of through that process. It's just, I think the intent on the province is to kind of speed the process up so that we're not, necessarily waiting for bi-monthly meetings of council to move things along, and things can just be streamlined a little bit. But
that's correct. And I would just add that when you're at a site, if a development only requires a site plan approval, it means that they're complying with the zoning bylaw. They're meeting all of your standards and typical requirements. So it's more of a checklist of things that we make sure that the drawings show and adhere to. If for some reason their site plan doesn't comply and they need to go through a zoning amendment process or a variance or anything like that, that will still come before council as it would under the normal course.
Councillor Bonato, I think I saw your hand.
A quick question. Site plans used to go through the accessibility committee because they had commentaries on, as you mentioned, accessible parking and some of the other issues that they deal with accessibility. I know once we reach 10,000, it's only the accessibility coordinator, but is there anything there that would pass through people that have accessibility issues that may have some ability, more commentary in regards to issues concerning accessibility? Is there anything going through in that way there? That's my only concern. I know staff does their best and they do follow whatever the town directives are, but sometimes we miss things that affect people with disabilities.
We do have the accessibility committee, and I understand that's now being integrated with the DEI committee on our standard site plan circulation list. So every site plan would be circulated. Similarly, if it's something in the downtown or in a heritage area, we would make sure the heritage committee is circulated. It does become, I think, part of the process issue is whether the committee meets on a timeline that would allow the town still to meet its 60-day time frame to make a decision. So as long as there's an opportunity for the committee to meet and review, what they've been circulated before a decision has to be made, absolutely those comments can be taken, can be provided, and we would take that in and make sure it's considered and passed along to the applicant before everything is finalized.
So with the 60 days, most of those committees meet at least monthly. They should be.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that should be something we can accommodate then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. Steve, so I mean, the site plan changes, I guess, under the bill seems minor in nature based on how you've outlined it. The major concerns that Councillor Buffett and Councillor Fegan put forward seems to be averted to this point. I guess my question to you is, because we know that the province is doing its very best to cut red tape, to get development out the door really quickly, the slogans, get it done, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see, or from what you're hearing, that even though we're just talking about the site plan now, that there's talk about other things maybe being removed so that development could really hit the ground running? So I don't know if you could speak to that, but I was just curious if you're hearing something else that's coming down the pipelines.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I didn't cover it in my presentation, but it is referenced in my report. Is one of the major changes that this bill introduces, and it doesn't come into effect, this component of the bill doesn't come into effect until January 1st, 2023, is that municipalities may have to compromise application fees or a portion thereof if a decision is not made on a certain timeline. And that applies to site plans and rezonings. And so the tricky part of that, we've had a lot of discussion with other planners in Dufferin County and throughout other municipalities as well, is what if it's the applicant who's making the process take longer? So that hasn't really come to a clear answer yet with the province, or I haven't seen a municipality that's kind of figured that out. Between now and January 1st of next year, everyone's going to be, I think, working quite hard to make sure that the process is clear from the front end. And I think what it will do is it'll put more emphasis and focus on early consultation before a formal application is made. So municipalities will still have the ability to make sure before an application is circulated and presented to the public for reaction, that it in fact has provided everything the municipality requires, so that there's no holes in it. Sometimes that's hard to do because things come to light through the process that you don't anticipate, but I think there'll be a lot more emphasis on that part of the process. So that is the one change in the act that is of greatest concern right now, because of that uncertainty about what happens if it's the applicant that's delaying things. But we are going to put some standardized guidelines and procedures together to make sure we can hit those timeframes, so that the municipality is not put in a position of having to return application fees. There are other things identified through the province's housing task force report that haven't been implemented or haven't been included in this bill yet. Things like allowing, as of right, every existing home or every property with one dwelling on it to be used for up to 4 dwelling units. We haven't seen legislation for that yet, but that was in the task force report. So things like that. We don't know if and when they're coming in terms of legislation, but that's definitely on the radar of things that we're reacting to give some comments back to the province, because there's a number of implications, parking and other things related to that, servicing as well. So there's a number of things in the pipeline for sure, but for now, this bill only introduces certain parts of what that task force had identified.
Okay. Any other questions for Steve? Okay. So the recommendation is obviously just to receive the planner's report, and then to provide for the bylaw, which will be bylaw number 30-2022, which effectively will appoint the Director of Development and Operations to be the authorized person for the approval of site plans, appoint the Director of Legislative Services / clerk as the authorized individual for the approval of site plan agreements, and then to authorize the mayor and the clerk as the designated individuals to actually execute the site plan agreements. And that's all pursuant to section 41 of the Planning Act. Can I have a mover and seconder for that? By Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? That's carried. Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
See you soon. Okay, next is a report from our treasurer regarding the asset management plan. And I think Carrie's going to have some backup on this one. I'll turn it over to you, Carrie, and you can make introductions from there.
Thank you. And through the mayor, this evening we have an asset management plan update that is legislated through Ontario Regulation 58817 and requires adoption by council. The town's last plan was adopted in 2016 and was prepared by an outside firm, Public Sector Digest, and is available on the town's website. In 2018, the town hired staff member Chad Smith to fill the newly created position of GIS coordinator. This position reports to the treasurer because the job entails a financial component as it relates to capital asset inventory and for the annual completion of the town's financial statements and the FIR. Council will recall meeting Chad during one of the council education sessions during the beginning of your term. This position has proven to be invaluable to more than just the Treasury Department for financial purposes. Chad's time is in constant demand, and staff on occasion find themselves battling each other for a piece of his time due to his resourcefulness. In addition to cleaning up pre-existing inventory, Chad is also responsible for adding in all new inventory. And for an example of that would be a new subdivision that the town has recently assumed. Every asset, whether it be below ground or above ground, within that subdivision is cataloged into the town's asset management software by Chad, according to historical cost, replacement cost, useful life, and condition rating. It is then linked through GIS as to its precise location. This assists both Public Works and the Water and Sewer Department with future infrastructure needs. Chad was also responsible for securing the town an FCM grant in 2020 that assisted with the successful implementation of maintenance manager software that is utilized by both Public Works and the Water and Sewer Department as a successful work order system to improve efficiencies and effectiveness, as well as provide backup for liability insurance claims related to such things as potholes, snow plowing, sidewalk maintenance, management, etc. Chad also works very closely with the town's engineering and planning firms, as well as our Parks and Recreation staff, and is a valuable team member to capital projects. Many of the maps that you see attached to staff reports for such things as the splash pad, tennis courts, dog park, community garden, our connectivity trails, all of those maps were prepared by Chad. With his extensive knowledge in the town's infrastructure and in relation to the citywide capital asset software, it's only seemed logical that we would have Chad complete the required legislated update to the town's asset management plan, rather than contracting and paying an outside firm to do so this time. Luckily for us, Chad was up for that challenge, and he prepared the 71-page report that is attached to my report tonight as Appendix 1. And I will now turn it over to Chad so that he can fill you in on the changes to the plan and his presentation.
Hi, Chad.
Hi, Mayor Mills, Vice Mayor Anderson, members of council. Thank you, Carrie, for the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Chad. I'm the GIS coordinator of the town of Shelburne. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the June 2022 update to our asset management plan. So if you just share my screen. And I would just like to confirm everyone is able to see the presentation.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. So the outline for the evening is to begin with an introduction, where we will discuss some definitions of asset management, what our management plan is, what the information in the current update that's attached tonight, what's included. After that, we'll move into definitions. These will be important to understanding the later stages of the presentation, including the key statistics. The third part will be reviewing some of the key statistics. These will mostly be high level, focused on the inventory, meaning the asset inventory as a whole, as opposed to diving into each individual component. The fourth phase of the presentation will look at some limitations of the asset management plan that are important to consider when reviewing it. We'll then look at the next steps for the town as far as asset management, and we will close with a question period. I would like to ask, if possible, to please hold your questions until this time. So to start off, discussing what is asset management. It is a business approach to the administration of capital assets. At its core, the goal is to minimize the cost of asset ownership while maximizing the value residents or customers receive from the asset. Additionally, asset management involves developing and determining the level of service that is required to meet the needs of a community. It also includes developing a life cycle strategy, which includes from start to finish, in service to decommissioning of an asset, what is involved to maintain that piece of infrastructure. And finally, it involves risk assessment. And that does relate to life cycle strategies. An example of that may be in a given year, what maintenance or what rehabilitation may be rescheduled. And if it is rescheduled, what could be a potential consequence of that decision. Next, we'll look at what an asset management plan is. So is a planning tool or a source of reference for council, staff, and the public. The asset management plan includes a review of, or a snapshot of the state of the infrastructure, and included in the review will be topics such as the quantity, age of the infrastructure, and the overall condition. An asset management plan also outlines the municipality's approach to managing its assets, and this would be the life cycle strategy discussed on the previous slide. An asset management plan is not an exhaustive strategy to manage infrastructure. It's a general overview of the municipality's approach to groups of related assets. So then how should this document be used? It's best when referenced for making decisions regarding infrastructure. It's used to support long-term operational and financial plans, as well as grant applications. Additionally, it is most effective when used alongside related documents. As I mentioned, the information is a general overview, and other documents, plans, and studies, such as the 5-year capital plan or the development charges studies, those include detailed information about specific capital investment. Looking at some of the legislative requirements, as was mentioned in the Treasurer's report, Ontario Regulation 588/17, Asset Management Planning for Municipal Infrastructure, is what applies to the document tonight. The regulation outlines deadlines as well as criteria for municipalities to report on their asset management strategies. The first was due July 1st, 2019, and that is a strategic asset management policy. Following that are 3 consecutive updates to the asset management plan. In 2022, the asset management plan must review core municipal infrastructure assets. 2024, all of infrastructure assets are brought into scope. And in 2025, municipalities must discuss their proposed level of service over a 10-year period, as well as a detailed justification to why that is suitable for the community. So where we are today, as in the Treasurer's report, the town's strategic asset management policy was passed on May 27, 2019 under bylaw 33-2019. So tonight we're looking at the phase 1 update to our asset management plan due July 1st, 2022. As required by legislation, each update to the town's asset management plan must be endorsed by the executive lead of the municipality, as well as approved by a resolution passed by the municipal council. So taking a look at what is in scope of the phase 1 update to the town's asset management plan. As I mentioned, it includes core municipal infrastructure assets. So those include bridges, culverts, roads, as well as infrastructure involved in the conveyance of stormwater, wastewater, and water. For each category, the quantity, average age, replacement cost, condition, level of service, performance, and life cycle activities must be reviewed. Additionally, asset management plans must discuss assumptions for a municipality in terms of population and economic change. And we're going to define these reporting categories in just a few slides. So looking at the June 22 update that is attached to the report tonight, this is a discussion of the layout and what to expect and how the information is presented in the document. So it is organized into 10 sections. It opens with an executive summary in section 1. Sections 2 through 4 provide context and asset management, very similar to what we're discussing right now in the introduction, as well as definitions and methodology. Following that, each asset category, so those are your core municipal infrastructure assets, have their own section, and under each section, all of those reporting categories are covered, in addition to recommendations, which identify some of the shortfalls of that asset category in terms of how they are in the town's asset inventory. And finally, in section 10 of the asset management plan, there are discussions relating to the assumptions of population and economic change. So we'll move on to some definitions, and we'll begin with some general asset management terminology, which are not exclusive to the asset management plan tonight, but will help to understand some of the later slides in the presentation. So first is the asset inventory. This is a collection of structured asset data. It's where each asset is individually recorded, along with any information that corresponds to it, such as its historical cost, its in-service date, the number of years it is expected to remain in service, as well as any secondary information that could be the diameter of a pipe, material, or the depth of a water main. The second definition is category. So these refer to groups of related assets. So a few slides ago, we looked at the core municipal infrastructure assets. Those are categories. Bridges, roads, those are categories of assets. Within each category are segments. So for example, the water category includes distribution mains, valves, fire hydrants as an example, and those would be considered segments within the water category. Moving on to some of the definitions that relate to legislation and the reporting metrics required for each asset management plan update. First is quantity. This is simply the number of assets that are in one category or one segment. Second is the replacement cost. This is the cost to replace an asset, and it is based on two methods in the June 22 update. The first is the cost per unit, and what this is it includes material and construction costs, often included in studies or reports from engineering staff that would determine the cost to fully replace that asset. And when that cost per unit is either not available or cannot be applied to a segment, the historical cost of an asset is used as an alternative, and that is performed by the town's asset management software to the year, in the case tonight, 2021, that is relevant. Next is useful life. Useful life is the number of years an asset is estimated to remain in service and be able to deliver the required level of service. So this is determined by the town's asset management program, and it is standardized for segments within a category with limited exceptions. The useful life is determined by working with manufacturers, engineering staff, as well as experience with similar infrastructure. Next, average age. And this is simply the number of years an asset has been in service. And it's average because in the scope of the update tonight, it refers to assets in a segment. Next is the condition. So this is the overall condition of assets in a segment or in a category. For Shelburne's asset management program, we use a condition rating scale from 1 to 100, with 1 being a very poor condition and 100 being considered a very good condition. Condition is determined using two methods, preferably a field inspection method, which involves an individual visually inspecting the asset and determining its condition from that undertaking. And second, when a field inspection program has not been developed or field inspections have not been performed, age-based assumptions of the asset's condition can be used by the software. And what that means is if we have a road and it's estimated to remain in service for 20 years, and it has been in service for 19 years, the software will assume, based on the fact it has 1 year remaining, it is in poor condition. Next is level of service. Level of service reviews scope and performance for an asset category. So when I say scope, an example of this could mean for water, how many properties are connected to the municipal water service compared to the total number of properties in the municipality. When talking about performance, this could be a metric that looks at the number of emergency repairs to a water main in a specific year. Next, and different from level of service, is performance. This specifically refers to key performance indicators. These provide a high-level summary of how an asset category or segment is performing. They are determined by municipal staff, engineering staff, and are intended to ensure that the level of service required by the community is being achieved. Finally, life cycle activities. These list the activities such as preventative maintenance and rehabilitation strategies taken over the full life cycle of an asset. So when I say life cycle, I mean from in-service to decommissioning. And also included in life cycle activities is determining the interval at which activity will be performed, as well as an estimate of the cost. The importance of this is to understand the level of investment that will be required to maintain an asset over the course of its life cycle. Next is statistics. So we'll begin with the replacement cost by category table. This table highlights the total replacement value for each asset category, and the cost year is noted on the right-hand side. The reason the cost year is included is because, as I mentioned, some use a strategy, while others use an inflated historical cost strategy. So the total for the inventory tonight is just over 114,200,000. And for the next few slides, we'll refer to this as the core municipal infrastructure asset, or the acronym CMIA total. This chart takes the table and visualize it to show the percent each category's replacement cost accounts for compared to the replacement cost of the total CMIA inventory, which is 114,214,494. Looking at the chart, wastewater is ahead at 40,739,000. This is largely due to the fact this asset category has the wastewater treatment facility. Next is a chart for the condition of the CMIA inventory. So this chart highlights the percent of assets that are within each condition category. So for example, there are roughly 33% of assets in the inventory to be considered in good condition. And it's important to remember when viewing this chart that it incorporates both field assessments and age-based condition assessments of the asset. And an example of why there may be such a large number of assets that are in good condition could be that assets from subdivisions newly assumed by the town are added in bulk. This next chart builds on the previous and looks at the percent of assets in each category that fall under which condition rating. And before I continue, I do need to mention on the x-axis label, percent of segment should read percent of category. I should have presented my definition slide to myself before I labeled this chart. So how to interpret this? Take a category such as roads. The legend on the right-hand side shows which color corresponds to which condition. So looking at roads, there are roughly 15% of all assets in the roads category that are in very good condition. There are two outliers on this chart. First, in the bridge and culvert category, which show nearly 80% of the category to be in poor condition, which is discussed in the asset management plan update tonight. The bridge and culvert category uses a unique condition assessment scale, still following 1 to 100, except up to 60 as a condition rating is considered in poor condition. The reason this is unique to bridges and culverts is because it follows inspections performed by engineering staff under the Ontario Structure Inspection Manual. And as I mentioned, that is discussed in the asset management plan tonight. Looking at stormwater, similar to the previous slide, the large number of assets in the good category is partly due to subdivisions being assumed and entire stormwater networks for that subdivision being added in one step or in 1 year. So next we'll look at some of the limitations of the asset management plan. First and foremost is data availability. Compiling the asset management plan requires information about infrastructure to be available. There are some categories in the town's inventory that are largely composed of information that stem from older data sources predating the town's current approach to the structure of the asset inventory. Therefore, the completeness of the asset data is occasionally inadequate. This is most commonly with secondary asset information, such as the location or the material of a pipe. But without information such as this, an asset can either not be located, or a strategy such as a cost per unit for replacement cannot be used because we cannot reliably determine what that asset is constructed of or what its diameter is. Next is data integrity. Equally as important as to availability is, can the data be relied upon? As I mentioned, some data sources do not mirror the town's current approach to managing asset data. These are ones that predate the town's asset management inventory as it is right now. Another limitation are material and labor costs. Over the last 2 years, material, labor, and overall construction costs have increased. The June 22 update to the asset management plan reflects replacement cost data that was available as of 2020 or 2021. Regardless of the replacement cost strategy, whether that's cost per unit or inflation-based, it does not fully reflect the construction costs that we are seeing currently. So it is likely, when reviewing the asset management plan, that it should be remembered that future updates to the plan will likely have a dramatic difference in the replacement cost for the inventory. So how are limitations like this addressed? It first begins with identifying the shortfalls. We need to know where the gaps are, what information doesn't add up or is otherwise inadequate. Second is outlining a controlled and phased approach to improving the category. So some of these strategies are included in the June 22 update under the recommendations section for each asset. And last, conducting continuous review is the most effective way to determine where the gaps are and where resources to close those gaps should be focused. So an exercise such as annual audits or preparing an asset management plan such as the one tonight provide the most insight. So what are the next steps? Well, first, looking at legislation. As discussed earlier, our strategic asset management policy was passed in 2019. And the recommendation outlined the treasurer's report to adopt the June 22 update to the town's asset management plan will satisfy requirements for July 1st of 2022. That brings our next step to the phase 2 update of the asset management plan due in 2024. Taking a brief look at what that update includes, the same reporting metrics such as quantity and average age, except now all municipal infrastructure assets are in scope. So the format for this update will be very similar to the one reviewed tonight. So what are the next steps for Shelburne's asset management program specifically? First and foremost, to continue to prepare asset categories to ensure they are ready for the phase 2 update. This refers to ensuring they can accept a cost per unit replacement cost as much as possible and ensuring that the condition data will be available when the asset management plan is assembled. Second, the recommendations to the core municipal infrastructure asset inventory will be deployed. And these recommendations are, as I mentioned, in each section of the June 2022 update. Each category has its own unique set of recommendations. And third is to continue to evaluate the town's asset management program for suitability. This includes items such as the useful life that is assigned to each segment. Is it making sense? Are assets remaining in service for this amount of time? The life cycle activities, the interval they're performed at, and to verify that the strategy for presenting and communicating this information in our asset management plan. Is it effective for decision making, and is it useful? That brings us to the final phase of tonight's presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks, Chad. I mean, it's obvious that a tremendous amount of work has gone into that. So thanks very much for all of your efforts and expertise in putting that together. Obviously, a lot of information thrown at us, but are there any questions for Chad on what was included there? I had one, and I think I probably know the answer, but I'll ask it anyways. In terms of the condition rating slide, so it was that one that sort of had the color codings. Is there any way historically to track sort of progress that has been made on that? I mean, obviously we've done some fairly extensive infrastructure work this term, but do we have any historical data in terms of condition ratings to compare where we are today, say where we were, X number of years ago?
Thank you, Mayor Mills. Yes, in our asset management inventory, as we add new condition assessments, the previous condition assessment for the, for example, previous year is maintained indefinitely. So as using as an example, the roads need study that is updated periodically, as that is added to the inventory, which it is regularly, it will always be maintained throughout the life cycle of the asset.
Excellent. So I mean, that's a good way, I think, for councils, future councils as well as the community to sort of track progress that's being made on those things. I guess in a perfect world, you would like to see those bars under fair or poor condition getting smaller, and the good to there's a good to very good categories growing, but time will tell. Anything else for Chad before we move on? No? Okay. All right. So the recommendation is to receive the report and to adopt the June 2022 Asset Management Plan update in accordance with Ontario Reg 588-17. We have a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All right, all in favor? It's carried. Okay, thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
All right, next is our CAO report regarding 420 Victoria Street.
Thanks, Mayor Mills. So joining me as part of the team that prepared the report is Steve Weaver, as well as Steve Burnett. So bringing this back to you has been a long process in getting here, but we did go through significant site remediation over the last couple of years and in follow up to the November report. So the purpose of this report is to provide council with not only an update, but to request that you declare the property surplus so that it can be sold. I'm actually going to address the recommendations first and then go to the background analysis section. Critical to the ability to surplus this property is the protection of the allocation and increasing the site to approximately 3 meters, of which I'll speak to in more detail later. And that's to ensure that it has viability for sale. Like the November report in 2019, this is premised on the fact that we want to recover as much of the investment in the cleanup as possible, which is now going to be sitting at probably about $1.2 million, of which $400,000 was included in the approved 2022 capital budget. So we also reviewed, and legal consultation was undertaken in the preparation of this report, the options with respect to the strategy for the surplus, and that's namely whether or not a record of site condition would be achieved to surplus the property and sell it, or whether that could be done in the absence of that process. And the report has recommended and strongly recommended that while it will take more time, that a record of site condition is critical with respect to the town's risk management, not only for ourselves, obviously, but for anybody purchasing the property, to ensure that the maximum value in terms of the property is something that we're able to achieve in the process. So the link to the prior report is there, just to refresh council's background if you choose to go through that. And as I already mentioned, we're expecting that the project will meet the budget. We're hoping it won't exceed the budget of the $1.2 million price tag. With respect to the limitations, and these were things that council did have some updates through an in-camera process, but with respect to the limitations that we're expecting, they're going to be most likely limited to the ability to have a well on site. That probably is a non-issue for most end users that might be interested in this property because it is fully serviced by municipal water. Potentially in the certificate of property use, and it's outlined in a sentence on page 2 of 6, that there may be additional restrictions. We just want to be cautious in terms of potential, I guess, site restrictions, that there may be, for example, residential use in a lower level or a basement that may not be able to be accommodated. But again, we won't know that until we actually have the ministry's final approval on the certificate of property use. So the property, as council is aware, is about 0.73 acres. It currently has a zoned institutional use. That doesn't preclude the fact that the zoning could not be amended. We have outlined that any end use changes with respect to zoning, even in the sale of the property, would be the full responsibility and cost of the person or persons or developer purchasing that property to achieve the end use that they would like to have. Council also had a presentation back in January 2022 from a local community organization, Dufferin Community Living, who had outlined their interest in this property to support a group home, which is a currently permitted use, and to create a viable end use for employment opportunities, not only for the residents of their home, but for those people that would be employed supporting them. In addition to that, council may be aware that we have as staff seen interest in the property. Obviously, the real estate market is fairly hot, as they say at the moment, while there is some settlement, that there is close proximity to downtown. As I've mentioned, the site is fully serviced. So we feel that one of the end uses might be alternative residential development. It may be more intensification, as is now required by the province. And ultimately, we won't know what that potential end use is until the property is listed for sale and the bids, or I guess proposals, are received for the evaluation in terms of costs and revenue opportunities for us. I've also noted that certainly there will be potentially some end uses that would have less revenue streams for the town of Shelburne, depending on whether they collected property taxes, and in some cases whether development charges were being requested to be waived and not received by the town. So the bylaw that we currently have, and it is recognized that it's fairly dated, and like many other bylaws, we're now working towards updating. This will be on our list, but it certainly is prescriptive enough in terms of the process that council needs to authorize staff to move forward with the notice of sale with respect to giving notice that the property is being intended for surplus. We then have to come back to you within 14 days of, well, not within 14 days, but we have to give 14 days notice. We would like to come back to you as council as soon as possible, only recognizing, and not that it may happen, but in case it does happen, whereby you are lame duck, we certainly as staff would prefer that council provides that ultimate decision to approve the bylaw. And we've noted that we're hoping to bring that back to you on July the 25th. We would continue to work towards the record of site condition from the ministry, which again, I know is a still intensive time process to be 100% sure on the risks being mitigated. That would be in January to February of 2023. Then we would look for the issuance of the property for sale documents by the town. And our intent is that we would manage that process, not incurring any commission to sell it, and then review based on the documents that we issue what would be the price, the minimum price that we would be wanting to receive, and then come back to council with a recommendation in April or May of 2023 on the, I guess, the proponent that the recommendation from staff would be to sell and why, and that would be all in a public format. So in summary, we would also undertake, I should say, a land process appraisal for the disposition, knowing that The market is still quite aggressive at the moment, but that would cost us approximately $1,000 to know what our minimum requirement for the bids would begin at in terms of what we would accept. So looping back to the recommendation, there is under recommendation 3 that notice is hereby given, and we would like to recommend that that be done, completed tonight, that the waste treatment plant allocation of 2 cubic meters be reserved. If there's any more specific questions on what that means to the allocation process for development, I would like to refer those to either Steve Burnett or Steve Weaver to address. We certainly recognize that that will have some capacity impacts on the limited reserve that we have, but in the absence of that protection, it will affect the ability to make this property marketable. And we expect that it would also have a significant impact on the value that someone may be willing to commit to in February, let's say, of 2023, or even April of 2023, when they would need to wait till approximately 2025 to undertake any development until the waste treatment plant expansion had been completed. So I'm happy to answer any questions. As I noted, both Steve and Steve are here as well with respect to any allocation questions on the recommendation to increase the property from 1.0 cubic meters up to 3 for a potential sale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buffett.
So, excuse me, regarding the reserve capacity, if you were translating that into the potential for number of units, is there any way of calculating that?
Answer that question, and Steve can fill in if not. That capacity is approximately the same as about 3 to 4 homes. So number of units, it actually was based on some potential commercial uses, some potential residential uses, and some potential apartment uses. So it would range in that 4 to 5 homes total, including the existing allocation that is already on the site, or the equivalent of sort of that 12 to 14 apartments sort of option, or the equivalent of a commercial block that was utilizing the available space on the site. So it was kind of a general placeholder, because obviously we do not know what the ultimate use is. So.
Right.
So the total of 2 cubic meters, Steve, would be the equivalent of 4 to 5 homes?
No, the total of 3 cubic meters, Your Honor. It has a 1 cubic meter allocated already based on the current use, and what we're asking council
2 more
support 2 more for the total of 3, which would be approximately, I think it works out to 4.7, but it's in that 4 to 5 home range, basically.
Okay. Anybody else? So Denise, just in terms of process, I mean, I appreciate the fact that, we're going to do as much of this as possible in open session. I think that's the right thing to do. Presumably any appraised value that we're reviewing will be done in closed session, I think, for obvious reasons. But anything beyond that, we're probably going to be looking at doing an open session.
Yes, and usually through yourself, the appraised value is provided from a certified professional. There isn't really much to review other than, yes, we would let you know. And when we set the minimum bid on the reserve, when we issue the document, that certainly will be a reflection of what the appraised value is.
Okay.
So we weren't planning on bringing that back to council. It's really a transactional request that we undertake to get that professional opinion as opposed to staff guessing.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay, so can I have a motion for the recommendations that are included there, which include providing notice of the bylaw for 14 days. And then as Denise said, if that passes, the plan is to bring that bylaw back at the July 25th meeting. Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. Any further discussion on this one? All in favor? That's carried. Okay, thank you. Denise, you're up again to discuss the HR resource person.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mills. And I have to apologize. The report is still loading for me, so I'm going to go from a bit of memory, but that's not a problem. So as background, in the 2022 draft budget, and consistent with the 4 positions that were recommended in our service delivery review from Optimus SBR Inc., the one position of HR coordinator due to budget stress in this year was removed. And it was the recommendation of council or direction to staff that that would be deferred to the 2023 budget. We're in a position late in the year midterm that we have some capacity with respect to gapping in our hiring timelines for a number of positions. The budget that was approved was based on the positions being hired in March, and we hired them a bit later in May. So that has provided us with an opportunity. Additionally, we did not proceed with hiring the student within legislative services because the response to the posting that we had was not positive. We didn't have anybody respond, and to repost doesn't really give us any flexibility this year to forward with that. So the estimate for the HR coordinator is approximately $80,000 annually, based on the base level salary plus the benefit and the employer related contributions, which traditionally range anywhere from 22% to 30%. So that's a combination cost. So a quarter, it's about $20,000 all in. The report is recommended to facilitate the recommendations from the SDR, as opposed to waiting until 2023, that we have the opportunity now to apply the gapping savings to support that position beginning in Q4 or approximately October 1st, 2022. This would allow my position in particular and others to redirect the workload with respect to HR, and especially having a certified HR professional as part of our team as we go through not only the implementation of the SDR, but we're also taking an operations review as well. And to, I guess, deferring it to 2023. So that really is the summary of my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Denise? So, I mean, in terms of, budget impact, it essentially will be neutral.
Yes, it's actually very neutral, totally neutral. The other thing too, we had originally budgeted through expenditures in our HR reserve to support the SDR operations review recommendation for about $80,000. We were successful in the grant application that we submitted and received over $80,000, which was a bit of a surprise, a little bit more, which was great. So that's giving us even more of a buffer in our HR reserve, which may be very important when we come back with the operations review and some of the recommendations through that process, as well as whether there's going to be implications flowing from the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, as well as it relates to staffing, as well as the operational and service support to many of the great projects that you've referenced tonight. And some of those projects will start as soon as October, September this year. So.
Yeah, I mean, certainly to me, it seems like a no-brainer. When the position itself was recommended by Optimus, and we discussed that at budget time, I don't think anybody questioned the need for the position. It just simply was, given how tight things were and how difficult a budget year it was, we looked at deferring that. But if we're now into a position where we can get an early jump on this year without impacting the budget decisions we made, let's do it. That's as far as I'm concerned. So, I'm happy to make the motion to receive the report and to go ahead and hire that full-time HR coordinator position as of Q4 or October 2022. And to fund that position from the gapping savings that we've realized through the 2022 fiscal year. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Buffett. Any other thoughts? All in favor? That's carried. All right, Denise, you're up again.
Thanks, Mayor Mills.
Go through our
I feel like Steve Weaver.
better term.
So I know that the attachments to this report were fairly significant, but they're also probably a great reflection of the number of directions that council has provided us in your existing term. So what this is intended to provide is to address the gap in information and also improve transparency and accountability. It is a summation of all of the directions of council, starting at your term in 2018 to now, so that we will create an ability on a quarterly basis, and this will be on the agenda, where all of your directions will be summarized. Then there will be a status update in that column, as well as what operating department it's been assigned to. So for example, if council gave us a direction in June, maybe of 2020, let's say, and while staff would have probably a better understanding based on the scope of the needs to bring that forward, council and the public may not. So this is going to provide more of, I guess, a template based on a standardization of information. If council gives us a direction tonight, we will immediately now be consolidating that in a working document, which quarterly will loop back to you, so you'll know where it is in terms of the timelines. That doesn't preclude you asking us what's happening, even if we've given you a date. But it also, we believe, will help facilitate, similar to the town page that we've recently implemented on the website for town projects, increasing information sharing and the knowledge of the community as well, which you as members of council can refer to this spreadsheet with respect to where those projects or those directions may or may not be. Additionally, we'll take out all of the incomplete projects or incomplete initiatives from your existing term to carry them over to the 2022-2026 term. And we're also starting with 2022 documenting council inquiries, which we hope will also be something that might be less required if, for example, a lot of that information can be found on our website as we continue to build the information on a public interface so that they're informed. So we talked about, when are the washrooms opening? When is line painting being undertaken? When is street sweeping being done? All those things that you as councillors receive questions from your constituents regarding, these tools will be able to help you redirect and I think share information on a more constructive, strategic basis. So really that was it. It was simply to provide you with a tremendous amount of work in going back and consolidating all of this. But with our eScribe, we've actually created, we have the capacity to always now coming out of each meeting, start to document that detail, structure it, and then follow up as staff collectively so that we all know now what all of us as a team are doing and where we're sitting together on delivering back the recommendations and the directions you've provided to us. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think going forward that this is going to be really helpful for everybody, council as well as staff, just to sort of keep a handle on things. It's probably a good reminder for council too to be aware of how much workload we are asking staff to undertake. But it also creates accountability the other way as well. Looking through this list that has been compiled, it's obvious that over the course of the 3.5 years that we've been filling these seats, we've thrown an awful lot at you, and it's nice to go through that list and see that the lion's share of the items are either completed or in progress, and that certainly is in no small measure thanks to the tremendous work of all of the staff team. So please pass on our gratitude collectively to the staff that have worn the brunt of the ambitious agenda that we've thrown at their feet. We came in, I think, this term wanting to accomplish a lot. We had to deal with an unexpected pandemic just a little over a year into our term, but despite that, it's obvious, with a dedicated staff, we've been able to work through it and accomplish, as I say, the lion's share of what we propose. So that's encouraging. Anybody else want to comment on that, or any questions about Denise with the process going forward? No. Okay. Can I have a motion then to receive the report? Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? It's carried. All right, next is a letter from the Canada Day Committee requesting exemption or relief from our idling bylaw and our noise bylaw for the purposes of carrying on the Canada Day event. Councillor Fegan, did you want to speak to that at all? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, I think.
It's pretty self-explanatory, but I figure for those watching, might not be a bad idea to talk to it. So what we are bringing to Canada Day is we're finally having an opportunity to have another car show. Since we did combine Street Fest with Canada Day, we've undertaken to have that happen this year now that the restrictions are finally alleviating. Now, the guys that we've got that are organizing the car show kind of put forward to us an idea of possibly having a revving competition or a loudest engine type competition, which could be, for those of us who are into the car scene, it's kind of an enjoyable thing to witness. But at the same time, I wanted to be very cognizant of the bylaws that we do have. So with the help of Melissa, we tracked down these two bylaws in regards to the idling and the noise bylaw. I do want to make mention to those of the community who aren't so into the noisy engines and that sort of thing. We do promise to keep this down to at maximum 1 hour. However, it's just sort of a fun little event that we can hold rather than just having the pretty cars. We could have some more interactive type entertainment at the same time.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Can I have a motion then to receive the request for information and to presumably provide staff with direction to do what's necessary to grant the request? I'll make that motion then. Councillor Fegan, would you like to back me up? Okay. All right. But before I call the question, then if there are no other questions from council, I mean, I would just like to ask staff for their perspective. Is there anything we're missing here or anything we should be concerned about? I mean, it is a one-day event. I'm hoping most people will understand that this isn't a long drawn-out thing. It's in celebration of one event. Denise?
Thank you, Mayor Mills. So certainly, yes, I think you've clarified that it is a one-off. It's limited to 1 hour. It is something that would dovetail well with the new Parks bylaw that the Director of Legislative Services is presenting tonight, so that we can actually deal with noise and other issues, but knowing that council has exempted this. I think we will, in addition to the Canada Day Committee, though, I think it would be important that we do some communication on this and enhance why there may be noise. We do have noise. We did have noise complaints recently from park related use. So I think that might just be very beneficial. And we can also maybe profile that council has approved this and why. So certainly.
Okay. Councillor Bernardo.
This is taking place in the downtown core?
No, this is at Fiddle Park.
That's what I thought. Do we have to notify the surrounding municipalities that we are doing this? Because you do have a subdivision that's in Amaranth, very close by. And you have neighbors there.
Good point. My thought would be we're probably not obligated to, but as good neighbors, I don't see why it would hurt to advise them. Denise?
Yes, Mayor Mills, I would suggest that's a good idea.
Yeah, so I mean, what I would suggest perhaps is that we send a letter through to their municipal staff. I'll give Mayor Curry a heads up personally too, just so that he's aware. And yeah, I would suspect that many of the residents in that subdivision may wander over and take part in the festivities anyways, but yeah, okay, no, good point.
No, it's just, sorry, Your Worship, it's just that you've got what is it called, Devonlea subdivision on the other side down on 37 as well.
Yeah.
And the last thing we need is a bunch of complaints, or I'm sure Mayor Curry doesn't want a bunch of complaints coming through to his council about what we're doing in the town of Shelburne as well. So it's just a courtesy, and maybe as part of public relations, we let the residents know this is happening as well through some form or another in that area. Just again, to stop any potential, problems from arising.
No,
That's it for me.
Good idea. Good idea. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried. All right. Next is a letter from the Rotary Club regarding the Heritage Music Festival for this year. Part of their concert series on June 26th, I guess it is. So a couple of things they're looking for is overnight accommodation for their security personnel. And then I think they're also looking for some line painting. Did any staff member want to speak to that? It seems to me that there's no issue with the overnight accommodation, but the line painting might require some more thought.
So it could be myself or Jennifer. I'm happy to start. So the waiving of fees with respect to in-kind services are two different approaches. So the in-kind services are exceeding our estimate of $500 for this. So we've suggested that that's something that wouldn't proceed this year, and that in the future the grant requests be undertaken. It's just we haven't scheduled staff for this, and it is, as you know, and you saw the list, we have a significant amount of new work with a number of new capital projects being initiated this year, where our staff are already committed to additional hours and weekends in particular to achieve some of these targets. This wasn't in the forecast of the schedule, and similarly to many employers, summer vacation is something that staff need to schedule and use, and we may not just have the resources. I mean, the most important thing is as well, we're hoping that there's an understanding and appreciation for the two policies that apply, and that our estimate, this is again well over $500, which would not be allowed, and that the grant process has come and gone for this year.
Yep.
And I'll turn it over to the director if she wants to add anything more.
I think the CAO pretty much has covered it. It was staffing, resources, and costs associated that were a concern.
So that being the case, I assume that nobody would take issue with any volunteers using marking bombs or something like that to mark their own spaces if they wanted to. Yeah, okay.
So Mayor Mills, the only thing we would ask is that staff be made aware of the kind of materials that they're using on the marking, and that we make sure that, the type of paint, the toxicity is something that we're well aware of, that there's certainly environmental issues that we would want to be aware of before anybody undertook the work on our property, but certainly, having that done is certainly something we'll support, but we would like to provide some guidance.
Sure. Okay. All right. So the recommendation simply is to receive the letter, authorize the overnight accommodation, indicate that all provisions of the facility use be complied with, and refer future requests for line painting to the municipal grant program in future years. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Bernardo, second by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, next is a request that I received from the president of the Dufferin Cricket Club. So as some of you know, there are two distinct active cricket clubs within the town of Shelburne this year. There's the Shelburne Cricket Club and the Dufferin Cricket Club. Last year, and staff jump in at any point if I'm getting my chronology wrong, but last year there was a request to council to purchase a portable CCAN storage unit for cricket. At that point in time, there was only one active club in town, so we did purchase that. In that unit currently is being stored some town property, which is used for cricket, as well as some of the equipment that belongs to the Shelburne Cricket Club. This request is coming from the Dufferin County Cricket Club, which is asking for, I think, one of two things, and whether that's really clear in the email or not, that's certainly what's been expressed to me. So they would either like the opportunity to share some space in the existing CCAN, or if that's not feasible, they're asking the council buy a second CCAN or make a second CCAN available that they could use for the storage of their equipment. I see the recommendation from staff would be to kind of defer any decision for buying an additional unit until next year at budget time. Any thoughts on this? Denise, did you want to give any further background? I know you've been dealing more closely with this issue than I have.
Just wanted council to be aware that the cost of the used CCAN was $3,500.
And that was last year's cost?
I think it was actually 2020's cost.
Okay, but my understanding, just in speaking with somebody else who's in that industry, is that the cost of those things have gone up like everything else over the last number of months. So we can probably add a few more dollars to that number, but.
And I'm happy to address the shared use if you'd like.
Sure.
So for those of you that are familiar with the CCAN, they are engineered structural entities. There's usually a single door, which they're long and linear. So the opportunity to share, unless there'd be no corridor to create sides. There's no ability to create a secondary door, to create 2 units, because an engineering stamp would be required on the integrity of the steel, and they are stamped. So for that reason, and that the other user has their own property in there and is not content or comfortable with secondary access other than town staff, neither is something that staff recommend is viable.
Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. And I don't necessarily disagree, I guess, with the ultimate conclusion, at least most part of it. And I guess the part that I take a little bit of issue with in how it could be interpreted, because, there's ongoing concerns and emails to staff and that many of us are aware of. But I guess when we say that SCC is not comfortable, I think could give the impression that they own the CCAN and they're making, which has been alleged that it seems as if they own the CCAN and are able to make decisions about who could use it and who can't use it. And so when we say that they're not comfortable, I think that could be interpreted the wrong way. It may very well just be just for the fact that there can't be this division. There's already town staff that's already occupying, or town property, or maybe additional town property in addition to what SCC has in there doesn't make it feasible. Then that's fine. That should just be the case. And then we say, look, we'll examine, because it is a growing sport, but we'll examine the opportunity to create a second one in the next budget year. So I'm just, again, I don't disagree with the conclusion in large part. It's just that little piece there because of some of the emails that have come in. We just have to be careful with that, because that could feed the narrative that somehow SCC is controlling what happens with this CCAN.
Councilor Wagner.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Mills. I guess I have a couple of questions with regards to this. I know currently the adult baseball league has sort of a storage facility where they the multiple teams share in that one space. So I'm wondering if maybe we can reach out to them and see how their CCAN potentially is divided up, and kind of go from there. My second sort of issue is the fact that we required, I believe, if I'm correct, which I might need to be corrected on this, but I believe we required the Shelburne Soccer Club to put in some money for the CCAN that they currently use. And they also only possess one from my knowledge. So in the fairness of course, being fair with, taxpayers' money and dividing that up between all of our equally within our sport leagues. I just want to make sure that we're not, and I don't want to use the word favoring one, league over the other or whatnot. I just want to make sure that we are fair and equal with all of our sports leagues in town, and making sure that we are providing them with, the tools to properly store their equipment. My third concern would just be, where are we placing another CCAN, because they are quite large. And, we want to make sure that we are facilitating, a place where these can be placed without taking away from the park or taking away from, land usage for baseball or, cricket or soccer or anything like that. So that would just be my concern. I know that they're not super wide, but if there's a way to create a tiny corridor down the one side that would go all the entire length of the CCAN and then be split in the middle that way, so that, someone could facilitate still walking on the one side, but it be, a locked unit on either side that way. I'm not sure, but I just want to make sure that, again, we're being fair with all that are in the town. So thank you.
Yeah, one thought that occurred to me, and I don't mind sort of, carrying the ball on this, but if we approached both user groups again to see if there was, any spirit of cooperation that may come to the surface to allow us to sort of use this thing cooperatively for the balance of this year. From the town's perspective, I think probably what we would want is some sort of indemnity from both groups to say that, look, you're going to use this thing as a shared asset, and the town is not going to be responsible if any of their personal property gets damaged and or goes missing. I don't mind reaching out to both groups to see if that is a possibility, but otherwise, I think, yeah, we're basically stuck with the recommendation that this is something that would be discussed next year at budget time, and we'll take it from there. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, just very quickly. It's our CCAN, right? And if two groups want to use it, then they should work together and use it. And to go and buy a brand new CCAN when somehow it could be used, as Councilor Wagner pointed out, there are other users in the town that are sharing CCANs. So there's no reason why this can't be done. And so they should come and work together, because it is taxpayers' money. We have invested in the sport, but as Councilor Wagner said, we have to be mindful of taxpayers' dollars. But so if it's just a matter of the two, and I love what you said with respect to the indemnity, right? And what Councilor Wagner talked about, maybe putting some sort of linear that expands from the entrance to the end, that sort of creates this sort of two linear hallways, so to speak, I guess, within that narrow CCAN, and allow them to go from there. That seems to me to make the most sense, because again, I get back to, SCC not feeling comfortable. They don't own it. They don't own it. And so if we could make an arrangement where both could coexist, where it appears it's being done throughout the town, then so be it. But I want to go back to Councillor Wagner's question, because we didn't get an answer to that. And I think it's important because in the spirit of fairness, as she said, so was there a situation where we did ask one of our user groups to foot the bill or partially foot the bill for the CCAN? Let's say whether it was for soccer or some other sport?
Denise?
There was a request through the grant process years ago from soccer for a number of new additional items, and the decision was made for partial funding, where and I don't have the exact specifics. So, the point is, yes, we need to review equity, fairness, and standardization. We need an allocation policy. We've come to realize that there's certain things that need to be standardized. So this would create, for example, where there could be a principle that in order for you to get capital property for your use, you should contribute potentially something towards the value of that for those capital costs, which is exactly what soccer has done in the past with respect to infrastructure. But your decision as council to provide, I think it was about $10,000, $10,800 for upstart of cricket was based on a mat and a sea can for that organization of the day, which was the Shelburne Cricket Club, to get launched. So there was some direction at that point on, not that it was exclusive, but it was for a specific club. So as staff, we've been trying to balance the wishes and requests of two specific clubs emerging, where one feels that their property within a contained area is a problem with respect to shared access. And I think, we can certainly walk through that. I will be honest, though, that it is not a large CCAN, so we can certainly look at how it can be separated that is functional without incurring a lot of new costs to create cages and or shelving or whatever else is required for that oversight. But to both of your points, Deputy Mayor Anderson and Councillor Wegner, yes, staff agrees that we really need to have some kind of deep dive on this, that we are emerging as a more active field use and a diversified use, and we need to balance those needs to ensure that we have an active community.
I think that's a key point, though, Denise, and it's worth restating that when these initial decisions were made, it was based on the assumption, which I think was fair at the time, that we were only really dealing with one user group. That situation evolved, and a second user group was created sort of late into the process, and now we have two groups that are competing not only for ground time but also for facilities and storage units and everything else. So I mean, it wasn't that that there was an unusual sort of arrangement designed to favor one group over the other at the outset. It was just they were the only players in town, and now there's another group which we weren't expecting. That's all good for the game of cricket within the town of Shelburne, but it also has created some growing pains that we're going to have to work out. So based on kind of the tenor of the discussion, I think what I would suggest is that we just modify the recommendation slightly. So receive the report, obviously, and then I would just add in there to continue to explore possible shared use arrangements. And again, I mean, from a relational point of view, I don't mind sort of reaching out to both clubs to see what we can work out. And then finally, that any request to actually purchase a second unit, if that should become necessary, be referred to next year's budget process. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Okay, can I get a mover and seconder then for that amended motion? Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Wegner. Any further discussion on that? All in favor? That's carried. Okay, next is the report that was included in the amended agenda that went out a little later, and that's the new Parks Use Bylaw. So I will turn that over to Jennifer to present.
Thank you, and through your worship, I'll give a high-level overview of the report. And as noted in the past and through previous reports, we've noted that we do have some bylaws that require updating to reference current legislation. So the proposed bylaw before you references current legislation, provides the town with the ability to address and respond to a wide range of incidents or concerns in the parks and on park property. It clearly establishes rules for the shared public use and enjoyment and lawful use of the town's parks and open spaces. The recommended bylaw to regulate the control and use of parks and parks buildings will assist with addressing general conduct, damage to property, campfires, alcohol and smoking, rental permits, and special event permits. The recommended bylaw is provided and attached as Appendix 1 to my report, and the main intent of the proposed bylaw as written is to address the use of town property as it relates to permits and approved activities and use. We've also sent a copy of the bylaw. It has been reviewed by the town's solicitor. Their comments and suggestions were incorporated into the proposed bylaw before you this evening. And happy to take any questions if you have any.
Okay. Questions for Jennifer? No? Okay. I have a motion then to receive the report and for the reading and enacting of bylaw number 31-2022, which is to regulate and control the use of parks and park buildings. Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? It's carried. All right. Notices of motion. Councillor Bernardo, you had raised the issue earlier on after I made the proclamation for National Indigenous Peoples Day about the flag, and sort of in giving that some additional thought, regardless of what happens at the DEI committee. I do think under our flag protocol, we do require a council resolution to raise any flag. So what I would suggest is that we pass a motion tonight, and given the fact that our next council meeting isn't scheduled until June 27th, which is after the day in question, I'm hoping that we can have consent just to deal with this tonight. And my suggestion would be that we just pass a reasonably generic motion that authorizes the raising of a flag on June 21st for National Indigenous Peoples Day. And if the EI committee authorizes purchasing a particular flag, that's great. That's the one we'll use. If not, then that still gives us the authority we need to raise another flag to observe that day. Does that sound reasonable to you? Do you want to make that motion then, Councillor Bernardo?
Sure. I will make the motion that we raise a flag on June 21st, recognizing the fact that it is National Indigenous Day.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Fegan? Okay, so I guess first question is there anybody opposed to considering this motion tonight? No? Okay. Any discussion on the motion? No? All in favor? It's carried. Okay. And I think that should cover us, Jennifer. Okay. All right. Any other notices of motion then before we move on? Okay. Communications, 18 items listed tonight. Anything that anybody wants to deal with? No. Okay. Can I have a motion then to receive those items listed as correspondence? Councillor Bernardo, seconder. Councillor Egan, all in favor? It's carried. I have a mover and seconder for the confirming bylaw. Councillor Bernardo, Deputy Mayor Anderson, all in favor? It's carried. Councillor Hall is not here to move the adjournment. He's recorded on most meetings on that one. Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Fegan. Any discussion on adjourning? Presumably no. All in favor? Carried.